Hey everyone, Dr. Jake Already here, and today is the last video of me trying to convince you that free will doesn't exist. We're going to go a little bit more philosophical, a little bit more high level today. And we're going to talk about consciousness and free will, and where do thoughts actually come from? I've got this hilarious meme here. Obviously, you've got to meme it up a little bit. I have free will, purple monkey dishwasher. See, no one made me say that. That's my brain. Neuronal activity dictates my choices, but my choices dictate my neuronal activity. That's average brain. All neuronal activity is dependent on prior physical states, therefore I have no free will. That's big brain. But this is massive brain. There is no I for which to attribute free will to. That's like next level. We may not get to that level, but let's try and convince you of this level here, of this next level. All right, let's jump into it. First of all, what's consciousness, right? Remember, I always said with an argument or any sort of debate, always define your parameters. So consciousness, the best way to think of consciousness is it's like a desktop. It's like your computer desktop on which to senses, like here's vision coming into it, here's sounds coming into it, but also thoughts and emotions, etc. So it's the space of awareness is consciousness on which sensation data, thought data, emotion data is placed, right? So it's where things become aware of it, right? So plants make decisions all the time to grow towards water or grow away from water and that kind of thing. So they're making decisions, but we would argue that it's not free will. It's not even close to thoughts or anything like that because there's no consciousness. They're not aware. They're not aware on a self level about what's going on, what sensations are going on. What's happening is roots might sense more water on one side than the other, so they head towards the wetter side, right? But the rest of the plant has no idea what's going on. So there's no consciousness in that situation. Whereas we're described as conscious because we are aware of these sounds and visions and thoughts and emotions that are appearing on our desktop of awareness, consciousness, right? Now, two of those things, right? Vision and sound. We have no choice about whether they appear in our consciousness right now. If your eyes are open and you are looking at the screen, you have no choice but to see me, right? So there's no freedom there. If your retinal neurons are firing, that's going to V1, V2, so on and so forth through your visual cortex, and you will see me if you are looking at me. You have no will. As much as you may not want to see this face, I don't know why, come on. If you do not want to see this face anymore, you have no choice if you are looking at me. Similarly, sound. If I creep up behind you and whack a pole, a metal pole with a hammer, I can do it as many times as I like, and you still have no choice but to hear that. So they will appear in consciousness against your will, right? So you are not free to not see or to not hear, okay? But in a moment, we're going to try and not think, right? We don't want any thoughts to appear in our consciousness. So let's try this. And when we do this, I think this is the closest I can get to doing this, right? So this is a visual illusion. This gray clearly looks lighter than this gray, but I can show you that it's an illusion by deleting the rest of it. Suddenly you are aware that that was an illusion. The curtain has been pulled back and you can see that this was a visual illusion and those grays are actually the same gray. Similarly, what we're about to do, I think, is the closest I can get to showing you that free will is an illusion, right? We're about to look behind the curtain and see that free will and experience it, which is much better than I think than information and logics, is actually experiencing that free will is not real. Okay, you ready? Here we go. So we're going to take 6 deep breaths. They're going to be unforced through the nose and just focus on the breath through that. Now, we're going to do this again. We're going to repeat it a longer period of time, but we're going to try and not think. So the goal is for no thoughts to appear in consciousness. And I want you to just observe if a thought does appear. So continue trying to focus on the breath, not allowing any thoughts to appear. And if a thought appears, just try and observe it and watch it go away and end up in a space where there is no thoughts in consciousness again. Okay, here we go. Okay. Now let's jump into that experience. The first thing I bet that happened was thoughts did appear. As much as you did not want them to do, as much as we were trying to follow the instructions of to not think, I'm willing to bet that thoughts appeared, just like vision and sound appears whether you will it or not. So will thoughts, which is an interesting conundrum. If you cannot control your thoughts, how do you have free will if they will not listen to your instructions? Now, what I'm willing to bet you thought about was, this is weird, man, Jack's nose sounds really whistly, or man, how long is this going to go for, right? And that's because we did it for a very short period of time and we were, quite highly stimulated through it. If you were to keep doing this, 15 minutes a day, just try and not think and observe any thoughts that appear and watch them drift away and try and not think again, what you'll notice is actually the thoughts seem to come from nowhere. You'll think about the time that you asked that person out and they rejected you because they thought it was a joke, or that's a true story. Or you'll think about that time that you bombed on stage when you're a 12-year-old trying to be a stand-up comedian, true story. Or you'll think about, playing with your dog or something like that. And these thoughts seem to come from nowhere, and you have no control over which thoughts appear, and they just sort of appear in your mind. Just as if sound appears in your consciousness, thoughts appear in your consciousness. If you have no control over what thoughts appear in your consciousness, how could you possibly have free will, right? If you can't control what thoughts are taking up your mind, are in your consciousness, how could you possibly have free will? Now, we can do this without this. That's called a mindfulness meditation. And I kind of avoid the word meditation because it's so wrapped up with woo and spirituality. But it can actually be done really from a neuroscientific perspective about how little control you have over your thoughts. And it gives you the practicing, observing your thoughts is really beneficial because you can start to catch yourself. This is what I find because I meditate every day, and I find that I can now catch myself thinking about something that I don't want to be thinking about. So then I can watch it drift away and allow a new thought to enter my mind. But before I started meditating a lot, you can get caught up in your thoughts, and you can stop. You don't have that well-trained ability to see a thought appear and decide whether you want to engage in that thought or not. It sounds very contradictory, but some people say it's like grabbing the puppet strings further up the puppet. You're still a puppet, but you've just got a little bit, you feel like you've got a little bit more control. We still have no free will, of course, but it's just good practice. Okay, but you can do it without meditating, right? If you very carefully watch your thoughts, you can do it without meditating. So here's what I want you to do. It's fast as you can, name a person from history. First person pops into your head. Go, name a person in history. Benjamin Franklin, right? For example, that's the first guy that came to my mind when I was writing this. Benjamin Franklin. Where did that thought come from, right? Why did you think that person, right? And it's an interesting paradox, right? Did you have a choice about what person you thought of, right? And it's actually impossible, because the definition of a choice, right, is you've got several options and you choose one, right? That's what a choice is. But if you have several options, then you're now immediately aware. Say you're like Cleopatra, Benjamin Franklin, Rosalind Franklin, right? Two Franklins for some reason. Cleopatra, Benjamin Franklin, Rosalind Franklin. And I go, I'm going to take Benjamin Franklin, right? Because for some reason, I'm sexist. Who knows? I take Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin wasn't the first person to pop in my mind. I went Cleopatra first, right? So for there to be options to choose from, multiple things have already appeared in consciousness, right? And so why did Cleopatra in that one appear first in my consciousness? That was the aim of the question, was name the first one that appears in consciousness, the first one you think of, right? And so you have no control. By definition, you have no control of what person came to your mind first, right? Now, that is just a brief glimpse at what's happening continuously throughout your life as you seemingly make decisions, right? And you have free will and ideas come to you, right? They come from molecular and physical processes that are occurring in your brain, which you have no control over, and you are simply being made aware of the decisions that have already been made by the molecular machinery of your brain, which is super confronting as a human being when you come to that realization, right? I'm sure we've all experienced it, right? You're trying to name someone and you can't figure out their name, and then all of a sudden you're not even thinking about it, and you go, Jennifer Aniston, that's her name, the girl from Friends, the fantastic actress from Friends. Jennifer Aniston is her name, right? That you couldn't get it before, and then suddenly it pops into your brain, and you weren't even aware that your brain was trying to think of that person's name, right? Your brain was processing, who is that person from Friends? You're not even aware of it. You've forgotten that you'd even gone through that ordeal of trying to name that person from Friends. And then all of a sudden you'll be drinking a cup of tea because you're from Kenya, and you'll be like, Jennifer Aniston, right? That thought is only being brought to your awareness after your brain has done all the computations and done all this background stuff that you're not aware of, and goes, hey, I remember that person's name. Let's make the doofus aware that I've figured it out, right? This machine has figured it out, and he's like, I better let the guy know that I've figured out who that person from Friends is, Jennifer Aniston. So let's play that again. Name the first animal that lives in the sea. Name it, right? Octopus, right? Once again, right? You couldn't have gone, okay, octopus, whale, shark. I'm going to choose octopus, right? Because then you aren't saying the first thing that came to your mind. You're choosing between an options, right? For there to be options, you have to have thought of multiple things, right? So the first thing that comes to your mind, by definition, you had no control over it coming to your mind. And that's how thoughts appear. That's how thoughts work. And it's because of the molecular and anatomical and physiological and psychological processes that are occurring in your brain that thought came to your mind, of which you had no control over, because by definition, you couldn't have had control over it because you weren't even aware of it. Now, what some of you might be doing is confabulating, right? Now, confabulation is when your brain makes up a story to fill in those gaps and sort of tell you a narrative of your life and fill it all in and make it a nice, complete, comprehensive story, right? That's called confabulation. So you might say Benjamin Franklin because I wear bifocal glasses and he invented those. That's why it came to my mind, right? Or octopus because I watched a Netflix documentary about a guy who was way too close to his octopus, in my opinion. And so that's why octopus came to my mind, right? But the truth is, this is a confabulation. This is your brain trying to fill in a narrative, and it may or may not be true. We have no idea, right? Your brain likes to tell you a story, which includes that you have free will, and includes that you have memory and you can remember how things occur, and that memory is pretty gosh darn good, and so on and so forth. It fills in the story and all the details of the story to give you a nice narrative of your life, and that's called confabulation, right? So if you were doing that, it's probably confabulation. Now let me prove to you with some really cool experiments that confabulation is probably why that is occurring. The split brain experiments. Now these are some cool ones. If you want to dive deep into this, these are awesome. So here we have a brain. Now to treat epilepsy back in the day, they tried this technique where they would split the brain in two. They wouldn't cut it all the way down, so they're not severing like the optic chiasma, for example. All they're doing is severing the cortical connections between the brains and some of the deep nuclei connections by cutting the corpus callosum, this major highway of fibers that connect your two hemispheres together, right? So they cut that. They don't cut all the way down to the optic chiasma, for example, right? So you now have a split brain. Now these patients described really interesting symptoms. They were largely fine and functioned normally, but they would describe very odd things. One example is your left-hand side of your brain controls your right arm and sees from your right eye. Your right-hand side of the brain controls your left arm and it sees from your left eye. What they found, they described these things where they would be choosing garments and the left hand and right hand would fight over which garment to choose. It's like, I'd like this blue shirt today that I'm wearing, and maybe I go, no, I want the green shirt, right? And so my hands start to fight over which garment to choose, which is crazy when you think about it. So to explore this effect, they did some experiments, right? So they took these split brain people. Remember, the left eye goes to the right brain and the right eye goes to the left brain. And these people had a severed hemispheres. And they would show them a range of objects. And then they would hold up a sign that only the left eye could see. So the right eye can't see the sign. And it says, pick up the apple in this case. So that information goes to the right-hand side of the brain and it says, pick up the apple. So then the left hand, which is controlled by the right-hand side of the brain, goes and picks up the apple, following instructions. So now he's got an apple in his left hand, right? Now the apple is brought in front, and now both eyes are aware that the left hand holds an apple. So now both eyes can see that the apple is in that left hand. So now we can talk to the person and say, why did you pick up the apple? Now what's interesting is, in most people, the language centers of the brain are located in the left hemisphere. Right? So the left hemisphere does the talking, but the left hemisphere doesn't know why they picked up the apple. So does the left hemisphere go, I don't know why I picked up the apple. No, the left hemisphere confabulates and it makes up a story, a narrative, in order for the person to have this sort of experience that they are a free thinking individual who lives their life as a conscious being. It makes up a story, because it's easier to believe that you're making free decisions. And this story might go, because I really like apples and it looked nice to touch, right? Another example is Rubik's Cubes, and they're like, I've always wanted to solve a Rubik's Cube. But the reason was because they were following the instructions. The left hemisphere just didn't know, and so it made up a story. And when the person is confronted about that and said, hold on a minute, is that real? Is that really the reason? Are you sure? The person goes, yeah, 100%. I remember thinking, yep, I like apples. I'm going to go pick it up, right? So they confabulate, they fill out that narrative of their life, which is exactly what you're doing if you say, octopus was the first thing that came to my mind because I just watched a creepy octopus documentary on Netflix, right? You're confabulating. You actually have no idea why octopus was the first thing that came to your mind. And it was actually because of molecular, physiological, anatomical reasons that you can't even understand, that are chaotic, remember? So they're unpredictable because they're complex, because they're chaotic. So you actually have no idea why octopus was the first thing that came to your mind. So just like the apple, instead of being told to pick up the apple, we have pre-conscious processes that lead to those decisions, Benjamin Franklin and octopus. And what we often do is we become aware of those decisions, and then we confabulate back to tell us a narrative on why those thoughts came to our mind. Confabulation. So let's practice again. Think of a shape. First shape that came to your mind. Square, triangle, circle. Which one was the first one? Again, by definition, you could not have made a decision because you were talking about the first one that came to mind. So why did you think of that shape? Honestly, try and observe and think about, where did that thought come from? And are you just confabulating where that thought came from? Did it just appear? Is that not sufficient? It just appeared from processes on which you had no control over. Now, it's been a lot of videos about free will and me trying to convince you that free will doesn't exist, but I'm willing to bet that you're still pretty unconvinced, right? This optical illusion, it still looks to me like those squares are different colors, even though I know and I've seen all the evidence for that those two squares, A and B, are the same gray shape, right? The cognitive illusion of free will is the toughest thing to shake in the entire world, right? Our attachment to reality depends on the idea that we can make decisions and we are objects of agency that choose to do things and we could have chosen to do otherwise. Even though all this evidence of all my videos and all the logical arguments, even though we know that deep down, really, we have to do what our neurons tell us. We are not free. Free will doesn't exist. Thanks, guys.